You stopped reaching out. You chose silence instead of another message, another explanation, another attempt to make them understand. Deep inside, you probably expected that your absence would affect them. You thought maybe they would notice, maybe they would realize what they were losing, maybe they would finally come back and fight for the connection. But then nothing happened. No message, no apology, no sign that they were struggling without you. And now you are questioning everything. You are wondering if you made the wrong decision. You are asking yourself if they ever truly cared, if the connection meant anything, or if they walked away because you were never as important to them as you believed. But before you accept that painful conclusion, understand this. What happens inside an avoidant person when you disappear is often much more complicated than what they show on the outside. Their silence does not always mean they feel nothing. Their lack of immediate reaction does not automatically mean they forgot you. When you go no contact with someone who has avoidant attachment patterns, you are not simply removing your attention. You are creating space where they are forced to face emotions they normally know how to avoid. And many people never get to see this process because they break the silence too soon. They send the message first, they check in, they apologize. They try to repair everything before the other person has time to truly experience their absence. And by doing that, they interrupt a process that was only beginning beneath the surface. So, if you are currently in no contact, thinking about it, or trying to understand what happened after you stopped reaching out, stay with me. Because we are going to look at what can happen inside an avoidant person's mind when someone they were connected to suddenly becomes unavailable. The first thing many people misunderstand is what happens at the beginning. When you first disappear, the avoidant person may not immediately feel sadness or panic. They may feel relief, and I know that hurts to hear. It can feel like proof that they are happier without you. But that relief does not always mean they never cared. For many avoidant people, emotional closeness can create pressure because their attachment system learned to associate vulnerability and dependence with discomfort. They may have developed the habit of creating distance whenever emotions become too intense. So when a relationship feels overwhelming, their mind may interpret closeness as something they need to escape from rather than something they can relax into. This does not mean you were too much. It does not mean the connection was meaningless. It means their protective system may have learned to feel safer through distance. When you were present, they may have experienced two opposite feelings at the same time. One part of them appreciated you, enjoyed your care, and felt connected. Another part felt overwhelmed by the emotional intensity. Then when you stopped reaching out, that pressure disappeared. For a while, they may feel free. They may stay busy, spend time with friends, focus on work, or appear completely unaffected. This is the part that confuses people the most. You look at their social media and see them smiling, posting, and living normally, and your mind starts creating painful stories. They never cared. They moved on instantly. I meant nothing. But what you see publicly is not always what is happening internally. Avoidant people often delay emotional processing. Instead of feeling everything immediately, they push emotions away and deal with them later when they feel safer. After the first few days, something starts changing. They begin noticing not your presence, but your absence. When you were there, they were focused on managing the relationship, managing emotions, and protecting themselves from feeling overwhelmed. But when you disappear, there is nothing left to manage, and in that quiet space, memories begin returning. The little things, the conversations, the inside jokes, the way you made them feel understood, the moments when they felt accepted. At first, they may try to dismiss those thoughts. They may tell themselves, "I'm only missing the routine. I'm just used to having them around." It doesn't mean anything, because admitting they miss someone means admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability is something many avoidant people struggle to face. But emotions that are repeatedly ignored do not simply disappear. They often move deeper and wait for a moment when they can no longer be avoided. After a few weeks of silence, their original story about the relationship may start to weaken. They may have convinced themselves, "I needed space. The relationship was too stressful. I am better on my own." And at first, your absence seems to confirm that belief. But then something changes. The freedom they expected stops feeling exciting. It becomes normal. And once the distraction fades, They begin remembering not only the difficult moments, but also the good ones, the comfort, the connection, the emotional safety. This is when some avoidant people begin quietly checking the connection. They may look at your social media, they may view your stories, they may like an old post, they may send a casual message about something unrelated, not because they are ready to openly express their feelings, but because they want to know if the door is still open. They are testing the situation without making themselves vulnerable. But this is where the cycle can become complicated. If they reach out and you immediately respond with the same emotional intensity as before, they may feel overwhelmed again. The closeness they secretly wanted can suddenly feel threatening when it arrives too quickly. So they may pull away again. This is why avoidant relationships can feel like a constant push and pull. They want connection, but they also fear what connection requires. Some avoidant people may even try to distract themselves with someone new. They may start dating, reconnect with another person, or appear to move forward quickly. From the outside, this can look like proof that you never mattered. But sometimes they are simply searching for connection in a situation where they feel more control. A new person has no history, no emotional expectations, no unresolved pain. It feels easier. But eventually the same patterns often return, because the deeper issue was never only about the person they were with. It was about how they experience emotional closeness. Your value was never determined by their ability to handle intimacy. You were not necessarily too emotional. You were not necessarily too demanding. You were simply trying to build a connection with someone whose defenses were designed to create distance. Understanding this does not excuse hurtful behavior. It simply helps explain why the same patterns can repeat. As no contact continues into the third or fourth week, your absence may begin feeling different. It is no longer just a temporary change. It becomes a reality they have to face. The person who spent so much time avoiding emotional discomfort now has to face the discomfort of missing someone. They can stay busy, they can distract themselves, they can focus on other things, but the feeling may still remain, quietly waiting. This is the stage many avoidant people struggle to admit. Their thoughts may not begin with, "I miss them." It may start with, "I wonder what they are doing. Why haven't they reached out? Did they really move on? Did I lose someone important?" And that last question can create a major shift, because many people think avoidant people fear intimacy the most, but underneath that is often a deeper fear. Being abandoned, being left, being rejected by someone they finally allowed themselves to care about. That is the painful contradiction of avoidant attachment. Sometimes people push away the person they are most afraid of losing. They create distance because being left feels unbearable. They would rather leave first than experience someone else choosing to leave them. So when you stop chasing, stop explaining, and stop trying to hold the connection together alone, something changes. They are left with their own thoughts. They may begin wondering if you are truly moving forward without them. This does not guarantee they will come back. It does not mean they will suddenly become emotionally secure, but it can create awareness. It can create reflection. It can force them to question the defenses that kept them distant. Some may mention you casually to friends. Some may check on you indirectly. Some may revisit old memories. Some may write a message and delete it. Not because they feel nothing, but because reaching out means admitting something they have tried hard to avoid. That they cared, that they felt something real, and that losing you affected them more than they wanted to admit. This is the stage where many people who broke no contact later wish they had waited a little longer. Because this is often the moment when the avoidant person is finally forced to sit with emotions they spent so much time avoiding. Breaking the silence during this phase can feel like releasing pressure. It gives them comfort. It gives them a way to escape the discomfort before they fully process what they are feeling. It allows them to calm themselves without ever having to truly face the emotions that could lead to change. But now we need to talk about something even more important. Everything we have discussed so far has focused on what may be happening inside the avoidant person's mind. And yes, understanding that matters. But the most important question is not only what is happening inside them. The most important question is what is happening inside you. Because you did not just disappear from their life. You stepped away from a pattern. Maybe when you first chose no contact, it was because you wanted them to miss you. Maybe someone told you that distance would make them realize your value. Maybe you read about it somewhere and thought it was the only way to get their attention. But somewhere during that silence, something else started happening. Something inside you began changing too. Because when no contact is done with the right intention, it does something powerful. It gives you your own emotional balance back. When you are connected to an avoidant person, your nervous system can become constantly activated. You start analyzing every message. You study their tone. You notice how long they take to reply. You wonder if you said something wrong when they become distant. You begin adjusting yourself to avoid triggering their walls. You become careful with your words. You try to become less emotional, less demanding, less yourself, because you believe that maybe if you become easier to love, they will finally stay close. And that is exhausting. The difficult part is that many people do not realize how drained they are until they finally stop chasing. When you stop checking your phone, when you stop waiting for their next reaction, when you stop creating the perfect message, when you stop trying to convince someone to understand your heart, your nervous system finally begins to relax. And in that quiet space, things that were hidden by the anxiety of the relationship begin becoming clear. You start remembering who you were before this connection. You remember what it felt like to be around people who showed up without making love feel like a difficult task. You remember that wanting closeness was never a weakness. You remember that needing communication and emotional security was never something you should have been ashamed of. And as your sense of self returns, something interesting happens. The avoidant person slowly becomes less powerful in your emotional world. Not because they become a bad person, not because they suddenly stop mattering, but because they are no longer controlling your entire emotional state. You begin realizing something painful but freeing. You are not only grieving the person, you are grieving the future you imagined with them. You are grieving the version of them you saw in the beginning. The version that was attentive. The version that felt open. The version that made you believe this connection was different. Because often, avoidant people can appear incredibly present in the early stages of a relationship. They can be charming, caring, and emotionally available before their protective walls begin returning. And when that changes, you are left wondering what happened. You start searching for the mistake. You start asking what you did wrong. But sometimes the hardest truth is that you were holding on to a possibility, not the reality that existed every day. And that type of loss creates a very unique kind of grief. Now let's return to what may happen inside the avoidant person if you continue maintaining no contact. Of course, every person is different. Avoidant attachment is not the same for everyone. Some people have more self-awareness, some have stronger defenses, some are more willing to face their emotions than others. But generally, after several weeks of silence, your absence becomes something they have adjusted to. It is no longer a sudden change. It becomes part of their everyday life. And from there, two different paths can happen. The first possibility is emotional shutdown. This is when the avoidant person completely disconnects from the feelings connected to the relationship. They convince themselves it is over. They bury the emotions. They continue moving forward without allowing themselves to fully process what happened. From the outside, it may look like they moved on easily, but that does not always mean the relationship meant nothing. Sometimes it means their defense system is so strong that even meaningful losses are processed through avoidance. Some people carry the memory of important connections for years without ever truly understanding what those relationships meant or why they struggled to keep them. The second possibility is a breakthrough. This is the outcome many people hope for when they choose no contact, but it usually requires something deeper. It is more likely when the connection was meaningful, when the avoidant person has some level of self-awareness, and when the silence forces them to confront patterns they can no longer ignore. In this situation, they may reach out. But this is something very important to understand. An avoidant person reaching out does not mean they are suddenly healed. It does not mean they have instantly become secure. It only means their desire for connection has temporarily become stronger than their fear of vulnerability. And when closeness starts becoming real again, old fears can return. That is why if an avoidant person comes back, the most important thing is not to immediately return to the old dynamic. Do not rush back into constant communication. Do not try to prove how happy you are that they returned. Do not abandon your own emotional stability because you finally received the attention you wanted. Because if the same pattern begins again, the same distance can return. A healthier approach is calm and steady. Respond with warmth, but do not respond from desperation. Show that you care, but also show that your life continued. Show that your happiness does not depend completely on whether they choose you, because emotional stability feels safer to someone who fears being overwhelmed. And from that place, a healthier connection has a chance to grow. But remember this, no contact is not supposed to be a trick. It is not meant to manipulate someone into missing you. If your entire purpose is to make them return, you are still giving them control over your emotional world. No contact is powerful because it brings you back to yourself. It gives you space to see the relationship clearly, not the relationship you hoped for, not the relationship from the beginning, not the relationship you believe could exist if they finally changed, but the relationship that actually existed. And from that clarity, you can make a decision based on your needs instead of fear. You deserve someone who chooses you freely. You deserve someone who does not require you to become smaller just to keep them comfortable. You deserve someone who turns toward you when they feel afraid instead of running away. Healthy relationships are not relationships without fear. They are relationships where two people face fear together instead of making each other the source of it. And one thing is important to remember about avoidant people. They are not automatically bad people. They are not emotionless. Many avoidant individuals are deeply caring people who learned early in life that vulnerability was unsafe. They created emotional walls because those walls once protected them. Those defenses may have helped them survive difficult experiences. But the same defenses that protect someone can also prevent them from experiencing the connection they truly desire. They lose closeness. They lose emotional depth. They lose relationships that could have helped them grow. But you cannot heal someone by loving them harder. You cannot convince someone into emotional readiness. You cannot force someone to face wounds they are not prepared to face. They have to choose that journey themselves. Some avoidant people never make that choice, and that is not proof that you are not valuable. It is proof that their healing requires work only they can do. Some people change after deep reflection, therapy, or life experiences that force them to confront themselves. And some people eventually return with more honesty, more awareness, and more willingness to build something different. But none of that is something you can control. The moment you truly understand this, not only in your mind, but deep within yourself, you stop living your life waiting for someone else to become ready. You stop standing in the waiting room of another person's healing. You start choosing yourself again. Your purpose is not to sit and wait for someone to become the person you need them to be. Your purpose is to become so deeply connected with yourself, your values, and your worth that you only make room for relationships that are capable of meeting you with the same honesty and effort. And if you are currently in no contact with an avoidant person, or you are walking away from a relationship where you constantly felt like you could never fully reach them, I want you to understand something important. The silence you are experiencing right now is not a sign that nothing is happening. It is not emptiness. It is space. And that space is powerful. It is the place where you begin finding yourself again. It is where you stop spending all your energy trying to understand their emotions, their distance, and their fears long enough to finally reconnect with your own. It is where you stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and you begin asking, "What do I truly want?" And that question matters. Your desires have always mattered, even if you were with someone who made you feel like your needs were overwhelming. Even if you were made to feel like wanting reassurance, consistency, and emotional closeness was asking for too much, it was not. Your needs are not unreasonable. Your desire for a love that feels stable, present, and emotionally safe is not desperation. It is not weakness. It is not being too much. It is simply being human, and that kind of love exists, but sometimes it may not exist with the person you are currently grieving. So protect your silence. Not as a way to make them chase you, not as a strategy to force them to realize your value, but as a gift to yourself. Stay with it long enough to hear your own thoughts again. Stay with it long enough to understand what your heart is saying when it is no longer overwhelmed by the constant effort of trying to reach someone who keeps creating distance. Because the deepest transformation that happens when you stop contacting an avoidant person is not what changes inside their mind. It is what begins changing inside yours. That is where your healing starts, that is where your clarity returns, and that is where you remember that your love was never the problem.